But let's start with a bit about me, and then I'll go through what we're going to cover today. There's a bit of interaction to do as well. So I'll let you know when I'm looking for you to get involved in an exercise. And then we'll round up with any questions you have for me. But do, as I say, please use the chat as we go, and you would find it helpful to ask me any questions. So who am I? Well, I grew up in South Bristol in the West Country in England at the end of the 1980s. My dad was an electrician. He worked in the local factory. He left school at 16 and did one job for 40 years. And when I was growing up, I had a very different outlook on life. Most of the people that I knew didn't go on to university. And yet most of the work I wanted to do, as Anna very kindly introduced me then, was about social change. I wanted to go into government. I wanted to work on public policy. And it was a bold ambition to have at that young age when that wasn't likely to be the kind of work that I did. And I was having a conversation with the co-author of this book that I wrote called How to Go to Work, the honest advice no one ever tells you at the start of your career, with Lucy, who's my co-author. And she too had a very similar experience. She went into a very different kind of work to me in advertising and social enterprise, mainly doing sustainable fashion, fascinating work. And we both realized that there were all these things that you kind of learn on the job that no one had ever told us, things that we would have found incredibly helpful at the time. And we reflected on the nerves that we were feeling going into the workplace for the first time and what we had to learn along the way. And we had always supported people at the start of their career or people we knew who were changing their career. And we started listing all of this amazing advice, stuff you don't normally get told. Things like how to ask for a pay rise, which is there's a very specific way that actually really works, which I could share with you. That was all worked out by a Harvard professor a few years back. How to speak up in meetings, how to build a good relationship with your boss, what to do when things go wrong, and they do go wrong. Projects don't go the right way. You might not be getting the feedback you need, and all of this we saw holding us back, holding other people back that we knew at the start of their career. So we started to compile that. We spoke to over 100 people from different industries, from brain surgeon, that was a fascinating conversation, through to a Savile Row tailor, to a nurse, to a driving instructor, to one of the guys who worked on the COVID vaccine as a research scientist, to a very good friend of mine and a social change campaigner who is a pro-vice-chancellor at the University of Sussex as well, to the brilliant Sam Friedman, who's one of the academics at LSE, and I don't know if any of the LSE students here do his course. And what we found was there were some really common themes that kept coming up, some things that tools and tips that we can actually use at the start of your career. And I guess if there's one thing I'd say to introduce this, it's that, as Anna reminded me recently, when you're very much at the start, embrace your potential. And I'll talk a bit more about what that means in a minute. It is a difficult challenge to transition from the world of education to work. It is a difficult challenge to move into a different job. And yet a few key skills can help you navigate that challenge. And hopefully I can share some of those today. I'm very grateful for your time listening to me today. And I hope some of this will be useful for you too. So that's a bit about me. The other thing was this, and this is really where it started, was a friend of ours, Poppy, who was 23 at the time and wanted to go into illustration, said, all I had was what my parents taught me and they were wrong. Now, you know, I remember my parents teaching me things like pride in a job well done or looking after people. And allyship has become a really big part of this work. Supporting those around you, being a good team member. But actually, some of the things about different workplaces are real challenges too. And the second thing I just add is a really important part of my early career was when I had the real privilege actually of joining and supporting what was then the disability rights movement. And some of you might be familiar with its history. So I worked at the Disability Rights Commission. I was initially an advisor on education and then went on to be the head of policy there. And so much about that working environment taught me a huge amount about how the world can be a wonderfully inclusive, thoughtful, supportive place. And a lot of stories of where things hadn't gone well for so many of the people that I was working with there. But we worked on the early days of the Equality Act as it is now. And I learned a lot, I think, and still try and share a lot of those learnings today about being a good ally, about being somebody who can provide the right support, about the fact that it's my responsibility as a non-disabled person to create an inclusive environment in the teams that I run. That things like long-term health conditions and flexible working are incredibly compatible and very supportive, and things like kindness are more important than performance management, but also a fundamental to it as well. And so I'd add to this sentence, it's not just all I had was what my parents told me and they were wrong. It's that all I was told about what work should look like and be like was probably wrong too. And all of you will be going into work shaping its culture, and we'll talk a bit about culture, shaping its practices, and we'll talk a bit about that too, defining what an effective business, what a high impact charity, what a profitable company, what an efficient part of the public service looks like. All of you will be defining that and shaping that with all of the things that you bring. So don't see the world as it is. Look at how you can change it. Here's a few things that we'll be covering in this session in particular. And as I say, pop items in the chat, make suggestions as we go. I'll add my LinkedIn at the end. So if you want to come and say hello and ask me any questions, I'm so happy to help. I'll always give you time. But what we're going to cover today, and I hope this is useful, is things like what you might need to think about when you're starting your new role. And there's a lot of things to think about. Quite a good way to turn worries into actions that I tend to use when I'm starting out. A bit about company culture. I don't know how many of you have thought about company culture, but why it matters, and a few tips on how to decode it. And then some of this might be really familiar to me, to you. So apologies if I'm repeating myself, but I will make some tips about making reasonable adjustments as well. The civil servant in me that worked on the Equality Act is still very much alive. And I think it's really important to have that knowledge as you go into the workplace as well. And the last thing I was just going to say in terms of an introduction is don't forget you have these incredible career services. That they have an incredible amount of knowledge and insight, that you have these alumni events and the alumni connections. And actually, I started giving these talks because UCL, where I went to, contacted me and said, do you want to give a talk? We think it'd be quite useful for some of our students. That one-on-one career coaching is so important. It can help you find your direction, consider your options, can share lots of tools and tips, maybe get you thinking in different ways. And I know that a lot of my journey has been massively supported by really excellent, trained, professional careers advisors. So after this, do resolve to go and get that support. And in particular, we've got the lovely link between student services in the broadest sense and your career service as well. There's an enormous amount of support there. And I know that all of the practitioners who are working career services are thinking all the time about how they can improve the offer. So tell them what you need too. I noticed we've got Ed on the call as well from LSE. And I don't know if you're still chairing it, Ed, but you're running a fantastic working group recently about support for disabled students through careers advice as well. So I know a lot of this very exciting stuff is happening at the moment. Okay. Congratulations. Let's start there. Well done. You've got the job. Now what? You've gone through this huge process of interviews and maybe assessments. You've learned about a company. You've made decisions about the career that you want, or maybe you haven't and you've just taken the opportunity that arose. There's a huge amount of excitement when you're starting out a new role, but now what? What do you need to think about? There's a wonderful phrase that a friend of mine, David, once said, which is that his favourite time in any job is the time between he gets given the role. So they phone him up and say, congratulations. Or they've sent him an email to say, you've got the job, here's your start date, and the reality of starting it. And that can be a difficult time. But yet that opportunity, when you've been offered the role and you're about to go into it, is the best time to do the thinking that you'll need to do. What are some of the things that you might need to think about? You might be learning about a whole new organization, a new environment. You might need to think how to get there. One of the things I often do when I get a new job is I make sure that I've got all the IT equipment that I need. I sometimes do the journey that I will need to do to get to the office or to the site I'll be working at before I actually need to physically go. That's all kind of useful stuff because you want to prepare as much as possible. But even so, you'll be learning about lots of new things, lots of new people, and that's a huge amount to do in a quite short period of time. There's a lot about understanding the particular role that you've been brought into. One of the things I often say is that, once you've been recruited, feel really confident about that. I've recruited, I can't think, 300 people during the course of my career. Each one of those was from a short list of 5, was from a long list of sometimes 40, a role I'm recruiting at the moment, 60 people. You've gone through this process, and even before that, that employer has worked out what the need is in their business. They have come up with a job description. They've probably got it signed off by their chief executive or whoever runs the budget. So there's a huge process that's gone to bringing you into that organization. And at that moment that you arrive, that they offer you the role, they've chosen you and only you to do that particular role. They are totally invested in your success. So no matter how daunting it can feel right at the start there. Start with this incredible confidence, actually, that somebody has picked you as the best possible person to do this role. It's even true in internships. It's even true in short-term contracts if you're working independently. There's a huge process that has led you there. And your job then is to understand your role and to start to meet those expectations. There's a lot to do about getting the balance right between induction and doing. What I mean by induction is the process by which that employer teaches you to do the job, teaches you about the business, teaches you about your new organization, your new environment, and the role that you're going to do. Sometimes this will be really structured. You might even be part of a huge group of people going into that organization for the first time. Maybe it's just you and a small business, and they've not really thought a lot about how to induct you to the role. So you're going to have a couple of chats over a cup of coffee. But it's all really important to think about how much do I balance learning and actually doing the job I'm here to do. My bit of advice at this point from all the employers who spoke to is 2 things. Take the time to learn your role. We don't need you to get on with it straight away unless it's a very critical project. And that's very rare that you're brought in the middle of a really high stakes project. And secondly, ask loads of questions. This is a great thing to do. It's a wonderful opportunity to start saying, I don't know. How does that work? Who's that person over there? Asking loads of questions is a great way to be showing that willingness to be getting on with the job. You'll be meeting lots of new people and understanding their roles and how they interact with you as well. One of the things we certainly used to do in the old days of all being in the office all the time, and a few jobs are still like that, you'd kind of go desk by desk and you'd shake somebody's hand, and this is Bob and he works in accounts, and this is Sarah and what she does is this bit. And after the third person, you've completely forgotten everybody. You're trying your best to try and capture all this information. It's a nice way to say hello to begin with, but that's more about you being introduced to them. There's a lot you can do by just lots of informal conversations to find out about new people and their roles. And this really matters. So take the time to get to know new people. You might be, if this role has been done by somebody else before, dealing with some legacy issues, actually. What do I mean by that? Maybe somebody didn't actually get on very well with people in their role, or they did things in a very specific way. And you're doing something really quite different, coming in afresh. It's a wonderful opportunity, but there might be some ways that people expect that role to operate. And you might want to do it in a different way. Best thing there is to build a really good relationship with your line manager and start to understand how things used to be done and what you need to do differently. And then there's really practical stuff like what to wear on a Zoom call. I had a bit of a think about this. coming along today. I thought, well, I want to be kind of smart, so I want to present well. This is my new shirt. I got it at Christmas. I hope you like it. But I also want to feel kind of casual and approachable as well. So I really thought through, what do I want to wear? Some businesses have very strict ways to dress, others don't. And how to balance who you are and what you need in presenting yourself in the way that you feel confident and comfortable with, alongside the real practical expectations of that employer, the culture of that organization, are often played out in things like what to wear. Again, the best advice is, well, ask the question, what should I wear on a Zoom call? Or maybe have a bit of a conversation about what you would feel comfortable in with your boss before you go on to that call that's coming up. And this can play out, as I say, in lots of different ways. I think the critical thing to remember is there is a lot of change. Really look after your well-being in this difficult time as you move to work. As much as possible, document a lot of this stuff so that you've got it captured somewhere and you can come back to it, as all of this stuff is happening all at once. And also understand, what's expected, but also be clear about your expectations as well. And I'll go into that in a bit more in a minute. I actually have a file, I have it on my inbox when I start in a new role, that says, and it does actually say this, I think this will be useful, but I don't know what it is yet. And a lot of emails go into that file when I start out. And then, as I'll show you in a minute, there's a process for coming back to them and kind of understanding whether this is working or not. I hope this is useful so far. A lot to take in to begin with, but some scene setting, I think, about what it is to start out in work. Do send me any questions in the chat, or any observations if you've been through that experience before. I'd love to hear more. I've got a few thumbs up happening as well. Thank you for that. Some points of recognition. What next? Okay, let's look then about what this looks like in practice. Okay, before you start, we'll do this in a minute. It's really important to decide how you want to be known. And again, bear with me on that. I'll come back to that in a second. Understand and sell the skills and value that you bring before you start. Well, you've done a lot of that in the interview process, in the covering letter that you wrote, and then understanding company culture. And I'll help you with that in a minute. Day one, week one really matters. Onboarding, what do I mean by that? Loads of stuff like your contract, your hours of work, your place of work, the technology that you might need to use. Having worked a lot with people with additional support needs, which often comes through things like access to work, maybe a particular chair that they'd like to use, or some software that they need to be able to interact with. Doing all of this onboarding stuff in as much in advance as possible is really, really helpful. There's nothing worse than turning up to find the access to work payment isn't in place. And there are some new links between, for those of you who claim the disabled students allowance and access to work now. So find out, again, ask your career service about that. It's good to see it bridged more. But if you haven't got what you need to do your job in its broadest sense, as well as specifically the reasonable adjustments that you might need, it can be very difficult to do. So start thinking before you start what you're going to need for that onboarding. Simplest way to do that, have the conversation with the person in human resources or personnel, or who's recruiting you, to be able to agree that to begin with. Day one, week one, you are setting and you are managing expectations of others. It's all too often the case that you turn up in a new role and everybody goes, "Oh, fantastic, you're here. I'm so pleased." We've got so much work to do. Often the recruitment process can have taken weeks, months to happen. And so as soon as you arrive, these expectations are sky high. Well, you're going to have to carefully manage some of those. And you're probably excited too. You've put in so much work to get this role. What fantastic opportunity. You want to get stuck in and do this job that you have all worked so hard for all these years in education, and through that recruitment process and all of those applications that didn't go anywhere. And here you are, and your expectations are sky high too. So there's a bit of managing expectations that you need to do in those first weeks. And the answer to that is planning. Say to yourself, what do I want the first day to look like? And it probably is turn up in whatever form that is. I learn as much as I can, and then I finish and go home. And that is enough for day one. By the end of the first week, what do you want to have learnt, to have achieved? What do you want to know about? And I'll give you a process for setting up an action plan in a minute. Then think about your first 3 months as well. Where do you want to be in 3 months' time in this new exciting job? Often at 6 months, you'll have probation reviews. Are things going well for you and the employer on both sides? And again, the more note-taking and planning you can do through those first 3 months, the better. And again, I'll talk about that in a minute. Getting the support you need to thrive. That might be you're supported with a buddy in work. So somebody who does a similar job in a different team who you can have an informal conversation with. That first so important meeting with your line manager where they say, here are the things that we need to do together. And each meeting you have since then. Making sure that you've got the kind of equipment and the tools to be able to do the job, whatever that job is. I've had a great new member of my team who's doing design and illustration for our communications products. It took me 6 months to get her a Mac. So she's been struggling away with the usual kind of PC laptop, not having the right kind of power and the software in her computer to be able to really do the job. And it was exhausting to have to do it the long way around every single day. And I wish now, as my mistake actually, I'd got the right equipment for her to do the job way before she started. So your support can come in many different ways. The other thing is think about your personal life as well. Who's around you who can give you that encouragement and support. One of the biggest mistakes I made in the middle of my career was start a new job and cancel all my social events. I thought, this is very noble of me. I'm going to do a great job and I'm going to dedicate myself entirely to it. And very quickly, I ran out of steam. I ran out of support to nurture all of those things about me that matter outside of work as well. The conversation with a friend that I could say is that's happening. Is that supposed to happen? I'm finding this really stressful. Make sure that you keep the support around you as well in this time of great change. And lastly, and this is Anna's wonderful point here, embracing your potential. As I say, you are here, you are ready, and you are the best person for the job. You have been selected as the person to do it. So embrace that potential by making sure that you really get stuck in and show a great deal of that enthusiasm and enjoy what you will ultimately love doing. And even if this isn't the job that you want to do forever, even if this is only a stepping stone to something else, or frankly, you're just paying the bills, approaching it with that enthusiasm and engagement will always be the right thing to do. And nothing is wasted in terms of learning when you first start out in work. The last thing is about the everyday. So this is about receiving the feedback that helps you develop in your role. And we'll talk a bit about that in a minute, but being open and honest, even when it can be difficult, to that feedback. And that's why this book that we wrote is called The Honest Advice, because we think if you're able to take on board feedback, you will always be able to thrive and develop in your role, and one day decide that it's time to move and do something new because you've been able to complete everything that you wanted to do in that role. And I'd say keep these 3 things in mind. Just in terms of how you emotionally feel about the work. Do you feel yourself when you're doing your work? Are you trying to force yourself into a role that doesn't feel comfortable with you? There's a lot of work that I do on values and matching your values to your career. And I think it's really important that you do that right at the start. Do you feel you can act in accordance with your values and beliefs? So the things that you're being asked to do feel right. They feel like you're contributing and being engaged. And the extent to which you believe you meet the expectations of others. So am I doing what I've been told to do in terms of delivering this job? My team value the input that I'm giving to this task? Am I completing the objectives that my manager has been set? And this isn't from me, actually. These are the 3 biggest indicators from a fantastic body of research that was done by the Harvard Business Review. I have a strange obsession reading lots of Harvard Business Review articles about the 3 things that determine success at the start of your career. Can you be yourself? Can you act in a way that you believe is right? And do others think you're meeting the expectations of the role that you're in? 3 really big things to remember, and check in on that day one. That feel good to me. Am I doing the kind of work that I care about? What was the kind of feedback I got at the end of that day? Keep checking in on these three things, and they'll be a wonderful guide as you go through the work. Okay, here's looking at something practical before we start. Um, right, what I want you to do, I'd love to get some suggestions in the chat of just tell me anything, and this goes to the careers advisors on the call as well. You've all been here. Uh, Tell me about a concern that you've got about starting out in work. This was one I always hear. If I ask a question, my team, my boss, whatever, won't think I know what I'm doing. I joined my latest role before we all came back after lockdown into work, and one of my biggest concerns was I won't be able to build those working relationships that I want to do. I won't be able to really make any friends at work because we're all still stuck at home. Um, Another one that I hear quite a lot, or certainly feel quite a lot, is I won't get off to a great start. I won't be able to get across the things that I care about in work. So note down, put in the chat. I'd love to hear from you. Any concerns that you've got about starting out in work. Thank you, Ellie. Brilliant one just there. I love these concerns. They're fantastic. Thank you. Um, let's read these. Fantastic. And thank you for the questions as well. I will come back to those. Uh, Worst concern you'd be misinterpret office garden and get penalised for something you can't control. Totally agree. It's a really tough one, actually. Like any social group, you'll have people who've been working together for quite a long time. Often those first meetings, you'll be thinking, oh, I don't quite understand that joke. What does that mean? I've seen people try and build pages and pages and pages of what acronyms and initialisms mean, because you go into a business and they've got ASAs and PRUs and all sorts of things you need to dig through. So that's always a challenge as well. Remembering not getting too overwhelmed. Almost impossible. Definitely impossible to remember everything. We'll be able to articulate thoughts during group meetings. Really interesting one. I do a whole session on speaking in work. I think that's a fascinating area. Not just the public speaking and the presentations, but how to get your point across in meetings. There's a technique for doing it. And also one of the things I'd say is when you're new, there's this sinking moment when you say something in a meeting and there's silence. This is a good thing. This is everybody thinking. They're spending time kind of understanding your perspective. So it might feel like the most nerve-wracking thing, but actually it's a really good thing to do as well. Um, who is the best person to ask? Great one. Everyone, you often get, if you've got a question, you might get bounced around lots of different people in a workplace. Absolutely. The thing about ableism in work, sadly, as with so many things, you see it all the time. Often bias is happening in the background in a lot of these conversations. And in terms of a boss, obviously, let's remember you're in a environment of the Equality Act. It does exist. It's relevant to employers. And if you're in a position where you feel you can't have a good conversation with your boss, they're either not protecting you sufficiently and supporting you sufficiently, or keeping to their responsibilities, or worse still, being biased themselves. Remember, you have got that conversation to have with an HR department, and they will be able to support you as much as they can. But there's a real challenge to do that. Don't know what to do on the first day, or what you need to do in the job, and whether you be labelled. Again, every employer has a responsibility under the Equality Act to be able to respond to the reasonable adjustments that you need to be able to perform fully in that role. It is in their interest to effectively support you as well. But I understand the concern. There's a deeper one about, if I talk about things that matter to me, maybe I'll be labelled as something that I'm not. So building that honest conversation is really important. Making the wrong choice, there are other people better for the role. I feel that very often. not having enough training again, or the right kind of support to do it. And yes, well pointed out as being imposter syndrome. Thank you so much for all these brilliant points. And so many of them resonate with me. I've seen, interestingly, these comments come up many times, and I'll work through this process for how you can take them on in a second. Okay, so let's look at these concerns, and what a wonderful some concerning list that we all come up with. They're shared concerns. I hear them a lot. I feel them myself, and I want to run you through a quick process for helping you potentially manage them. What I'd like you to do is take one concern, keep it in your head, or maybe it would be helpful to write it down for you, and turn it into a question. So let's take the concern. If I ask a question, they'll think I don't know what I'm doing. Maybe the question is, what new things will I need to learn in my new role? Let's accept that that I have got questions to ask, and I need to find out some answers. So what new questions will I need to learn in a new role? What's the opportunity to do something about that? Well, maybe I don't just want to ask questions to the whole team or in that whole environment. I need to talk to my boss. You'll have one-to-one time with your boss. They're expecting you to not know stuff. You're brand new. You've been recruited to the role, but you're not the person who's got all of the answers, expecting to train you. And so let's put this into a learning plan. And what you can do over time is take a lot of your concerns and your questions and start to build these opportunities. If I ask a question, they'll think I don't know what I'm doing. What new things will I need to learn? I'll talk to my boss or to agree a learning plan. I might get something wrong because I don't know enough. What do I need to know about the industry so that I know what is right and what's wrong to do? There's a whole session I do about failure at work and how we often think of failure as getting something wrong, what they call in the literature process compliance. You have not completed the task. But actually, you think the other end of the spectrum about getting things wrong is that's where learning happens as well. Innovation in companies comes often from getting things wrong over and over again. So how do you get things wrong in a controlled environment? Well, read about the organization, the major partners, understand what things are happening, and then maybe you'll be a bit more informed to know whether what you're doing is experimenting in the right way or not fulfilling the guidebook you've been given. My boss might think I'm not up to the job. That came up in the chat. Well, how about questioning that? What impression am I forming? What evidence is there that my boss might think this or not? And so maybe have a conversation with my boss to get that feedback. It feels unknown and I'm assuming things. Well, could I actually say how I like to receive feedback? And so on and so on. Take all of these concerns, turn them into a question and think about the opportunity. The great thing, if you look on that right-hand side of the list that you've got going into work for the first time, is your to-do list for day one. So to that question about what should I spend day one doing? Well, talk to my boss one-to-one and agree my learning plan. I need to read a bit about the organization, the major partners who we're working with. I need to say how I like to receive feedback. You know, you might want to say, could we get together once a week and I can hear back from you how I'm doing, so I can base it on some evidence. Maybe then I'll agree a few achievable tasks. And the more you take your concerns and develop them into questions and build them into opportunities, the more you're giving yourself a fantastic to-do list to do the job. Hopefully that works. I talked a bit about culture, and I just want to run through that for a second. It's really tempting to think that culture is all about what the office looks like. Maybe you've got a nice glossy manual about the place that you want to work. And on the one hand, you've got these very practical concerns that we've hopefully now turned into a to-do list. On the other hand, you've got these enormous questions about fit and culture and how things get done around here. And they're much bigger than anything you'll find written down in that glossy brochure. There'll be some useful things. You'll get some hints and tips. I mean, you might want to check out, and I always recommend check out the kind of diversity and equality section or lack of it. And that will tell you a bit about how that organization thinks. the kind of language that they write in, the way they present. Look at the website. What are people wearing on the website? That probably answers your question about what to wear on a Zoom call. They're giving you lots of clues. So it's very tempting to think that it's just what they're offering in terms of, food in the canteen or the kind of culture that they project. But there's so much more to it than that. And this is really fundamental about how you will make a successful start in your role. Now, again, back to the Harvard Business Review. It's a fantastic article by a professor at a business school, which explains, I think, the best way to articulate what we mean by culture. It's the ways people in the organization behave and the attitudes and beliefs that inform those behaviors. The way we do things around here, including formal, stated norms and implicit ways people work and interact. What do I mean by that? Well, things like decisions made in big formal meetings with PowerPoint presentations. When I started out my career as a civil servant, that's what you did. It's a very low risk environment. Things have to be done very accurately and things need to be delivered to the best possible quality. So there's no room for error. What you need to do is really work things through and debate them and have very long meetings, often with all the right people in the room, to really decide what you're going to do. Big project management structures, lots of filing that you had to do of more and more information about a product, different teams that you had to consult, lists that you had to tick off. You'll find that the case if you go and work in a hospital, for example, in a classroom or a building site, or in the air traffic control industry. You've got a huge amount of that. It's very different to, say, a creative industry. So beliefs and the way things get done around here are fundamental to understand when you go into a different organization. There's the side to it that we've touched on a bit already anyway, which is where some things are felt to be acceptable views, attitudes, outlooks, or perhaps not effectively enforced, which can create a very uncomfortable environment as well. There are many, many, sadly, examples of companies who have behaved in ways which aren't acceptable. And you may have seen some of these in the media where, very fast growing businesses don't respect people's work-life balance. There's the major legal cases where we've seen problems in terms of gender inequality and promotions, in terms of pay, and all of these things come down to a sense of what the culture is within that organization. It's really important when you're choosing which organization you want to work for, and then when you get into that organization, that you understand the culture and think to yourself, is this, back to one of those 3 points at the start, somewhere I feel I can be myself, where I can really thrive? And that's going to be a really important part of your decision making as well as starting out in work. Because this is something we wrote in the book. The best moments in your career will be where you find a match between your personal beliefs and the values of the workplace you're in. And the worst will often be where there's been a startling disconnect between the two. And for those of you who have been in work for a number of years, who are graduate students perhaps, if you take a moment to reflect on your experiences and what it felt like to work for that employer, whether they gave you the kind of freedom and autonomy to pursue your dreams, or whether you really had to drag yourself out of bed every morning to go there, you will really feel that instinctively. Maybe you've had work experience opportunities and you've seen different workplaces and you've felt how you were respected and included within that experience or not. And this, again, is the kind of thing that's going to be really important to learn. So what I want you to do is, from this list, and there's no right or wrong answers, pop in the chat if you're happy to share it, 3 words on here which you think really describe the things that you value. And let me give you an example. One of the things I really care about in terms of work is empathy. I believe we all have very different needs. I have young children. I need to be there for drop-off and pick-up times from school nurseries. And I think it's really important to me in an organisation, in a team that I work with, that they have real empathy for the needs of others. I think at the same time, and I think it's hugely important as well is that we have real meaning in our work. As Anna said, to begin with, all my work's been in campaigning and social impact. I can't go and work for an organisation where I don't share its meaning. And the last thing that I really care about is about respect. I think it's really important that we give and receive respect from the other people that we work with in an organisation. But any of these are totally cool as well. I know a lot of people who like discipline and intelligence and power, and those are the things they want out of the organisation they work for. So pick your three, share them if you'd like, and think, what kind of culture would I like to work in, the kind of employer that I would most enjoy? Okay, let's see what people there as well. Brilliant. Authenticity, empathy, and value. Andrew, fantastic. Independence, opportunity, and trust. Very nice. Very nice. That's a really interesting bit of insight about how you like to work. Okay, what else have we got? Challenge, kindness, and respect. Fantastic. I love that you've actually put those things together, because I think you can. I think you can have a challenging, high-performance environment that has a huge amount of kindness with it as well. Creativity, empathy, freedom. Fantastic. Trust, compassion, opportunity. At the start of your career, really important to have a place that does give opportunity, that you feel like is going to give you opportunity too. And so if you take those three things that you're looking for, if you consider culture as being in a workplace about how things get done around here, what I recommend is, and what we learned from all the businesses that we spoke to, was that you ask some critical questions about what you can observe in terms of how that organization works. So when you're looking at that place and you're thinking about your role and you're trying to work out whether it's the right one for you, ask some of these kinds of questions. Is individual initiative or working as a team rewarded? A high-powered sales team where it's all about your results? Or is it like my experience in the civil service, where your evaluation of your effectiveness is done on how your team consider you're playing a part within it? And think about how that relates to whether you like to work with others or very much on your own, whether you are measuring yourself on what you're able to achieve, or you like that kind of compassion and respect of working alongside others. And decisions made in formal meetings, again, like me in the civil service, there is a casual chats. You go to a creative agency, some of the best stuff comes up when it's the least structured environment. Is the office like a house party or a doctor's waiting room? And if it's a doctor's waiting room, then it probably needs to be, if it is a GP surgery. But do you want those social connections in the place that you work? And there are some fantastic, wonderful, enjoyable places to work. And I must say, in my early career at the Disability Rights Commission, that felt often like a house party because you were working with friends. It was joyous. How much do you care about professional standards? If you go into the legal profession, there will be certain things that you need to be able to demonstrate and ways in which you need to perform. Or actually, do you like a bit more freedom and independence and autonomy? And are you looking for that in the job that you want to do? And then really interesting questions like, where does the money come from? You out fundraising that money? Is it a philanthropic money if you're working for a charity? Or is it about bringing in the money by selling the product? And how is it spent? One of the interesting things to look at is how much is spent on, if you care about opportunity and development, how much is spent on human resources? You can ask these questions actually often before you go into that role. Maybe it's a good interview question to ask. How much investment is actually made in terms of learning and development for people within this business? And that will tell you a lot about the values. And I think then if you link all of these things together, you'll get a really clear picture of who you are, what you care about, the kind of organization and what it cares about. And that will give you a real sense of the culture, and you'll be able to make some really big decisions about how to thrive in that workplace, or indeed, if you're choosing which workplace you'll most thrive in as well. Last bit I really want to talk about is this is a wonderful quote from an old boss of mine, Susan Daniels. She is the chief executive of the National Deaf Children's Society. I've known her for many years. She was born deaf. She now wears a cochlear implant. and she has been a champion of deaf children for many, many years. And it was wonderful, wonderful working to her as a campaigns director for the organisation. We did a lot about work for deaf young people. And if you're interested, there's a campaign that we worked on called Deaf Works Everywhere, and it was all about the kind of things I'm talking about today, showing deaf people really succeeding in incredible careers. And it was wonderful that it was led by our youth advisory board and by Susan herself, talking about her own lived experience. And I said, what's the one bit of advice, like, and we quote her in the book, that you would really share to anybody starting out in their career, thinking back on where you were 40 years ago? And she said this: be true to yourself, play to your strengths. If nothing else, Susan can look back on a career that she truly was true to herself about. She didn't try and squeeze herself into anybody else's expectations, and took a very small charity to a very big charity that's made a huge amount of difference to so many lives. But she also was very good at knowing what she wasn't good at. She's instinctively very talented as a leader, but not somebody who particularly likes the detail. She used to enjoy our conversations because she's quite risk averse, whereas I tend to go, what's the big idea and how can we make it happen? She would surround herself by people who would help her play to her strengths, who would understand her vision, as well as the things that she needed from others, and was able to be totally herself and play to those strengths by surrounding herself with people who complemented those talents. And the last thing I want to say really is disability rights activist, fantastic theatre producer Shona Cobb said this as well. I've had countless people tell me I shouldn't let my disability get in the way of achieving anything. But the inconvenient truth is that if barriers are in place, then they're the ones placed there by society, not by me. So remember, as you go into the workplace, remember that there are so many barriers there that could potentially hold you back, but they're not your responsibility. It's about others working with you and for you to make sure those barriers are removed. Here are some of the practical ways you can do this in terms of those regional adjustments. Look for positive signs. I mean, disability confident, great scheme, has its limitations, but it's a really big signifier of somebody saying, yes, this is something we care about and we are ready to support you. But don't restrict yourself to that. Remember, you don't have to tell your employer about your needs, about the impairment that you have. It's entirely up to you. Your confidentiality really matters, and if you're worried about that, then it's something to bear in mind. Obviously, the more you can share, the more those points of support, those additional reasonable adjustments can be made to make sure that you can thrive in work. But certainly don't suffer in silence. But remember that you don't have to tell your employer. But that once they do know, they must consider your request for adjustments. So again, there's a legal structure that's sitting around employers, and so many people fought for that. It's really important to use that. Do talk to your employer if you're worried. Remember those concerns right at the start. One of the things that can really help is to have that conversation, especially with your line manager or with somebody in human resources or personnel or whatever they call it, to make sure that your worries are being addressed. Again, the longer you're left without getting the support that you need, the harder it can often be for that employer to make things work for you. Do monitor how your work changes and the support you need to do the task. It has been really interesting working with groups of deaf colleagues during the recent lockdown. In some ways, transcription software was incredibly helpful in supporting a more inclusive working environment. Even the framing of faces and the lighting really helped in terms of better communication rather than the old kind of meeting rooms. We certainly used signs a lot more. And so bizarrely, what might have felt like a very negative environment it was very much welcomed by a lot of the deaf colleagues that I had at the time. On the other hand, though, so often our experience was that we were feeling more isolated from each other. We weren't making those social connections. So work does change over time, and we had to do things differently, informal Zoom coffees, and now obviously meeting each other in person. Where you have these conversations, if you need that support, of course, you can ask somebody to come with you. Often that's quite nice to make sure that you've got somebody observing the conversation who can work with you as well. It's okay to say you've only recently felt able to talk. If you've gone for a period of time not sharing what you need, and then you go in and say, actually, I do need this support, that's okay. We all understand that we're all human beings. And the access to work can help pay for adjustments, but be prepared for some assessments and delays. And I don't say that to excuse the scheme. I think it's just a reality. And I've been through it so many times to know that it does take time for certain things to happen, that often you have to buy something and then get it refunded. So build all of that time in. What does work is this continual process of engagement and development to remove barriers that exclude people, just constantly finding what's working, what's not, giving that feedback, having that conversation, making that adjustment in order to make sure that, especially as the world of work changes, that you've got those barriers removed. And that's not just your job. It's not just the work of the HR department, that whole organization, and why culture matters and why the right inclusive culture is fundamental to a positive experience of work is that we all have a part to play in making sure that we have the best possible workplace. With these few things, that's just a bit about me. With these few things, I think there's a wonderful opportunity for you to go into a workplace feeling confident. I think if you can have that combination of understanding who you are and what matters to you in work, and this opportunity to be able to engage with the people who can give you the support that you need, and you've had a chance to share the things that are most on your mind and get those adjustments made, I don't see why you can't go into work as you absolutely deserve to, with all the skills and brilliance and energy that you bring, entirely confident to make a great start in work.